When I woke up, I had somehow become trapped in the body of my disobedient daughter. I had sacrificed everything, living frugally to send her to the best school. Yet, she called me almost daily, claiming, like someone trapped in a paranoid delusion, that her teachers and classmates were out to harm her. She was willful and rebellious, picky about food, befriending the wrong crowd, and even dating a troublemaker at a young age. As a sister, she was far from kind, constantly bullying her younger brother. And school? Surely it couldn't be harder than working a full-time job. But then, as I lived in her shoes, a group of girls cornered me in the restroom, kicking me mercilessly. Returning home, I was met not with care, but with a sorry excuse for a meal. Only then did I begin to understand the pain my daughter had endured. My daughter attempted suicide. I was in the middle of a business trip when I got the call. I felt a wave of irritation at the sight of the school's number flashing on my phone. This was the third time in a month that my daughter, Madeline, had called from school. Every call was the same. Either she wanted to leave the campus, or transfer to a different school altogether. I had pulled countless strings to secure her a spot at the prestigious private academy, yet she never seemed grateful. Instead, she made my life more difficult with her endless complaints. I dismissed the call 3 times before I finally picked up, but it wasn't Madeline on the line. It was the school, informing me that Madeline had attempted to take her life in her dorm room by slitting her wrists. The words didn't fully register. The phone slipped from my hand, and the world faded from my eyes. Then, everything went dark. When I regained consciousness, something was different. I wasn't myself anymore. I woke up in Madeline's bed and stared directly at my own face. Get up already. You said you were sick, didn't you? I called the school to excuse you from classes, but when I tried to take you to the hospital, you refused to go. Do you think I don't know you're just pretending? It hit me like a lightning bolt. I remember that moment. 2 months ago, Madeline had called me, complaining about how unwell she felt. It had been a Tuesday, an inconvenient time when I couldn't afford any distractions. Yet she had insisted on taking the day off. And even after I let her stay home, she stubbornly refused to see a doctor, saying she just needed some rest. Back then, I thought she was being childish. But now, living this scene through her eyes, I began to see everything I had missed. Although I struggled to accept that I had somehow become trapped in Madeline's body, I couldn't bear the thought of her falling behind in her studies. Reluctantly, I forced myself to get up. As I moved, a sharp searing pain shot through my lower body. I froze, stunned. Then, I remembered. I had noticed Madeline limping, but I dismissed it as another dramatic performance from her. I thought her acting was painfully unconvincing. Mom? I called out. The word felt awkward on my tongue. Looking at someone with my own face and calling her mom didn't feel natural, but I wanted to tell her about the pain. She turned to face me, my face, her expression impatient. What is it now? Why are you always so slow? Do you have any idea how hard I've worked to raise you? Can't you show a little understanding for once? Or are you still pretending to be sick? I don't care if you have to crawl. You're going to school today. How did I end up with such an ungrateful daughter? Her words cut through me like glass, and I couldn't bring myself to respond. Those were the same words I used to say to her. Hearing them now, from my own mouth, felt unbearable. I swallowed the pain and the words I wanted to say, deciding instead to wait until after school to tell her about it. Breakfast was well-balanced and nutritious, though I couldn't stomach the cucumber. No matter how hard I tried, I just couldn't eat it. In our family, only Madeline refused to eat cucumbers. I always insisted on a balanced diet while hoping to cure her picky eating habits, so I made sure cucumbers were served at every meal. That morning, I ate everything on my plate, leaving only the cucumbers untouched. My sharp eyes caught it immediately. Look at that, picking at your food again, huh? It took me ages to break you out of that bad habit. What's the matter today? Why won't you eat them now? I was stunned. That was when it dawned on me. Madeline hadn't mentioned her dislike for cucumbers in a long time. Before I could ponder it, the me in front of me began rushing me again. Eat. You're going to be late. Hurry up. Back in my day, we didn't have these luxuries. We couldn't even dream of having cucumbers on our plates. The more the other me spoke, the more she justified her actions. She began recounting all the sacrifices she had made for me, painting the picture of a daughter who, in her eyes, had become an ungrateful monster, just because she refused to eat cucumbers. At that moment, her face twisted into something monstrous. I gritted my teeth, forcing down my discomfort. I kept telling myself that I was doing this for Madeline, that I was acting in her best interest. Swallowing the cucumbers piece by piece, I fought back the nausea. Afterward, she looked strangely satisfied, her face glowing with a sense of triumph, as though forcing me to eat something I disliked was a victory. When we arrived at school, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of relief, though I didn't understand why. It had been years since I'd been back to a classroom. As a high school dropout, I had a deep obsession with education, always feeling that I had somehow missed out. Given how tormenting the morning had been, I found myself oddly eager to experience school again, hoping it would offer some kind of escape. But the moment I walked into the classroom, someone poured a bucket of water over me. The ice-cold water shocked me as its chill sank deep into my bones. The winter air made it worse, and I shivered uncontrollably. Laughter erupted from the classroom, so loud that some students nearly knocked their desks over in amusement. A few girls stood by the door, grinning smugly. They were clearly the ones responsible for the prank. I recognized them. They were the daughters of my business partners. In my memory, they were sweet and well-behaved, which was why I always encouraged Madeline to befriend them. Yet she always hesitated and spoke about them in whispers. She had even claimed that they bullied her. I'd made a special trip to the school, hoping to sort things out. The The girls seemed so polite and apologized with perfect manners, claiming it was just a harmless joke. They made it sound like Madeline was the one being petty. At the time, I couldn't believe Madeline's claims. How could a whole group of girls be responsible for what she accused them of? I assumed that as the girls were also attending a prestigious school, surely they had proper upbringing and manners. I even scolded Madeline, convinced that she was being overly sensitive. After that, whenever she brought it up, I dismissed her completely. But now, as I stood there, shocked and confused, the girl at the front, Bella Cole, spoke up. Her tone was dripping with disdain. Well, look who decided to show up. Is the wench here for class? I couldn't believe my ears. I never imagined I would hear such vile words come from the mouth of a young girl, full of youth and promise. I trembled with rage and without thinking, I snapped back. Who are you calling that? You owe me an apology. It was as if I'd said something outrageous. Bella slowly walked toward me, and before I could react, I felt a tug on my scalp. She yanked my hair and slammed my head onto the desk. What's wrong? You've been home nursing your illness and now you think you can act out like a spoiled brat. I struggled desperately, only to realize how weak I was in Madeline's body. I also noticed how thin her wrists were. Compared to the already slender Bella, Madeline looked even smaller. The other students watched, laughing at my pitiful attempts to break free. Someone called out to Bella mockingly. Ha, looks like your dog doesn't listen too well, does it, Bella? In the chaos, someone shoved me. I crashed into the desk, knocking it over. Books were scattered everywhere, and I felt a sharp pain as my knee hit the floor. Bella watched me with amusement, an evil smile on her lips. This one doesn't listen, huh? Looks like it'll need more training later. Just then the bell rang, signaling the start of class. The door opened and in walked Madeline's homeroom teacher, Mr. Christopher Bradshaw. I had always thought highly of him. He was responsible and diligent. I thought to myself that finally, my salvation had arrived. Little did I know, things were about to take a drastic turn for the worse. Mr. Bradshaw simply glanced at me, before he addressed Bella. I've told you before, stay away from people like her, he said coldly. Then he turned to me. You've knocked over the desk. You're always causing trouble, aren't you? Of course, coming from a family like yours, I shouldn't expect any better. I stumbled to my feet, disbelief flooding my mind. I hadn't expected him to stand by and say nothing only to ridicule me after. Madeline had mentioned him before. When I'd talked to him about her, he'd spoken kindly, acknowledging her rebellious phase, and promising to look out for her. But now, reflecting on his words, I realized he had only ever spoken about Madeline's faults, and I had foolishly believed him. Unable to hold back, I tried to defend myself. They started it. They poured this all over me, and Mr. Bradshaw cut me off sharply. Stop making excuses. If you're not the problem, then why is it that you always get picked on? And now you're arguing with me. You've got some nerve, don't you? I fell silent, unable to find a response. Deep down, I even found myself blaming Madeline. She couldn't handle her social life, let alone defend herself at school. Reluctantly, I trudged toward the door with Mr. Bradshaw's voice trailing after me. So class, avoid talking to girls from unrefined families like hers. People like that have small minds. His words dripped with disdain for my family. To be honest, our situation at home wasn't that bad. My husband passed away a few years ago, and I had no choice but to leave my 2 children with their grandmother while I went out to work. By sheer luck, I had secured startup funding and ran my own company. While I couldn't compare to the wealth of the ultra-privileged, I was still well off. Having worked alone for so long, I'd faced unfair treatment from many sources, and had to swallow my pride and push through the challenges. Unfortunately, the people I crossed paths with were ones I couldn't afford to offend. When I went home, all I wanted was for my children to understand my struggles, but I never imagined Madeline would be ridiculed at school because of our background. I felt lost. It was a chilly winter day, and though I wore a puffer jacket, I still felt cold. On top of that, my body was soaked. Madeline's classroom was on the terrace where the wind blew relentlessly. I stood there shivering. My knees and private parts burned with pain. We had 4 classes that morning, and not a single teacher seemed interested in calling me inside. I endured the cold all morning, and by lunchtime, I thought I might finally get a break. I fumbled for Madeline's meal card. When it came to my children's necessities, I had always been unwilling to hold back, so the card was loaded with money. As soon as I entered the cafeteria, however, someone snatched the card right out of my hand. Well, look who's here, the little cash cow, a voice jeered. I instinctively reached for my card, but my body trembled uncontrollably, as though my actions were driven by some primal response to trauma. I recalled how I had been surrounded and bullied earlier in the day, and the impulse to snatch the card back was suddenly smothered. I let them take the card and swipe it for several expensive meals. I had once criticized Madeline for eating too much, accusing her of not valuing my hard work. Now I realized, she had never had a chance to enjoy good food. A heavy sadness came over me.